Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the Senate changes. The Senate made some reductions and some increases in a variety of line items in the general appropriations bill. The budget now spends a total of $31.6 billion when you include the transfer of the CFA line item to a restricted account. The major increase, ladies and gentlemen, was the higher education line items, which they
Members, sir, please just suspend for a moment, and I do apologize for interrupting. Members, I'd ask that everybody please take their seats. Any conversations, please take them to the anterooms off the House floor. Chairman Adolph will continue to speak. He will be followed by Chairman Markosik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, the major increase was the higher education line items, which will receive an increase of 2.5%. They include a $250 million appropriation to Penn State, $146.7 million appropriation to Pitt, $150.5 million to Temple University, $14.4 million to Lincoln University, and $30.4 million University of Penn Vet School. The other areas that were increased include agricultural, Department of Community and Economic Development, and Human Services. To increase the budget, we're talking about $75 million as compared to the budget that was passed here the other night. $40 million of that $75 million is going to higher ed, and $35 million to those areas of the budget that I just said. That is a summary of the Senate changes to Senate Bill 1073, Mr. Speaker. On the bill.
Yes, sir, on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to ask the members of this General Assembly to concur in the Senate amendments to Senate Bill 1073. As this General Assembly has been working in a very bipartisan manner, we're now on our last leg of our journey, which is to pass an on-time budget without any broad-based tax increases. No tax increase in the personal income tax, and no increase in the Pennsylvania sales tax. As I mentioned in my opening comments, this budget will spend a total of $31.6 billion when you include that transfer to a restricted account. This increase is a large part due to mandated expenses and snapbacks from the 2015-16 budget. $1.2 billion of this spending increase is the result of those snapbacks and mandatory increases. There's an increase of $300 million in discretionary spending, most of which went to higher education. It is important to note that we are making key investments in education, public safety, environmental protection, combating the heroin epidemic, and funding for our most vulnerable citizens. We went through that thoroughly the other night regarding those on the waiting list. On education, basic education funding will increase by $200 million. And I think it's important to say that the basic education funding line item reaches an all-time high, $5.895 billion. This is the highest it's ever been, including the years when we were receiving federal stimulus money. Pre-K counts will increase by $25 million. Head Start supplemental assistance will increase by $5 million. Special education will increase by $20 million. And early intervention will increase by $10.4 million. I think it's important to understand that our PACER's contribution was increased by $345 million in this budget. But ladies and gentlemen, this is the first time in 15 years that we'll actually meet our actuarial required contribution, the ARC. This is very important to our bond ratings and will put us on a path of fiscal stability. In total, we are spending an additional $665 million pre-K to 12 education. On public safety, the passage of this budget, the concurrence on Senate Bill 1073 will allow us to start 3 new classes of cadets for our state police. This will put 180 new troopers on our highways. This budget will increase the Department of Corrections budget by $152.8 million. On our environmental issues, this will allow us to make sure that our oil and gas lease fund can properly fund programs such as conservation and recreation programs, growing greener, and the hazardous sites cleanup. On combating the opioid addiction, ladies and gentlemen, it's hard to combat such a terrible disease without the funding. This budget has $15 million in it. Many of you out there have been actively seeking funding for these important line items on the budget. We have emphasized to our colleagues in the Senate that it is very, very important that this $15 million address treatment. And I hope during this special session that we're able to come to a consensus on that, as we will continue to push forward to treat the addiction. This budget will increase the Department of Human Services by $466 million. However, we carefully went through each line item and we decreased the increase by 50%. This budget also adds $8.5 million to provide services to 700 graduates of special education and to provide the services to 250 individuals on the emergency waiting list. I know how hard many of you have lobbied and advocated for these increases. In closing, it's June 30th at 6:30. We've been working in a bipartisan manner. Let's continue. Now is the time to take the ball over the goal line. This budget is a compromise. It's not everything that everybody wanted. You can always find something in a budget that you do not agree with. However, we know what we went through last year with the impasse and how our nonprofits, our counties, our school districts, our universities and colleges suffered as a result of that. We need to get this done. We need to concur Our constituents are looking to Harrisburg in hopes that we meet this deadline and not to repeat the impasse of last year's budget. This opportunity will show Pennsylvania the state government here in Harrisburg does work. We can work together. We can get this done. I encourage everyone in this chamber to concur in Senate amendments to Senate Bill 1073. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.